I'm a part of the Wildflower Alliance, which used to be known as the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community. And within our community, we hold Afiya Pure Respite, which has been around since 2012. And so I'm going to just speak in general about Pure Respite and why this is a good moment for change, why there's real momentum here building that I think everyone can grab a hold of and move forward and make some of these things happen in your areas. So just to recap, I think you probably all spent a lot of time talking about the power of loss of power and how much that impacts so many of us, and that's, how that is underneath all of why we're having this conversation. And unfortunately, we live in a society, at least the US and many of the other countries that I've been with are connected with people, and where we're harmed, we come to these points of distress due to childhood trauma and so many other things, and then we enter these systems for support, but those systems actually replicate the harm. And I'd love to share this slide because I think it's really powerful. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but I just kind of wanted to start here with the reality of how many times we are in an experience of childhood trauma, and then the system that exists replicates that trauma. And I'll pull out one quick example around compliance. You'll see childhood message comply or it will get worse, and system message comply or it'll get worse. I think of non-compliance as really violent language. As a survivor of childhood sexual, physical, or emotional abuse, the people who hurt me the worst said, if you don't do what you're told, you're bad. And then I got into a system that immediately started telling me, if you don't do what you're told, you're bad. And so this is where we're coming from. And I don't think that's a surprise to any of us, but I still think sometimes seeing this written out like this, and I'm sure there's many others that we could add, is a really powerful reminder of what we're trying to move toward or move away from. And as far as what we're trying to move toward, this is a great moment to be moving because we have all this support. We've got the United Nations saying, we need to stop talking about chemical imbalances and start talking about power imbalances. You see Daniel Mackler, special rapporteur, former special rapporteur for the United Nations, and that powerful report that he put out there that we've referred to many, many times. And then the World Health Organization just recently put out this report highlighting so many of the supports across the world that are coming from these much more person-centered, human rights-based approaches. And actually, Afiya is in the section on mental health crisis services. So you've got a Pure Respite that's in there. That's so powerful to be able to point to with legislators. I mean, honestly, I could pick apart concerns I have with some of the services they highlighted and all that. But in the end, if you're trying to get something in with a funder, if you're trying to create buy-in, the reality that it exists in this book and you can point to it. And in fact, that picture you see on the cover that they used for the mental health crisis services section is a picture I took with some of the people that were working in our Pure Respite. So there's a lot of good in there. And I will just say briefly, I keep hearing person-centered approaches, and I hope that when you are talking to your legislators, to your community about getting these supports going, that maybe we move away from some of the conventional perspectives on person-centered, because so often I hear person-centered being about how can we get this person to buy into the existing system? How can we get to them to the table? And I think Pure Respite and Soteria and so many of the other alternatives are about how do we crush the tables, or how do we walk away from the tables that exist, not how do we drag more people to them, and how do we build new tables together? And I think that's what Pure Respite and Soteria and so many of these things have grown out of. And so, so much of the message in those documents and so much of the message I want you to take away from all of this work, and I think that a lot of you are already holding, is that, we need to move toward supporting each person to take power back and make meaning within the context of their own lives. It is a profound loss of power to exist in a system that tells you what they believe is wrong with you and what you need to do about it. And these supports are about taking so much of that back. And we also, when we talk about power, power doesn't have to be inherently bad. It's so much about it is stop using power over people and start using power under people to lift people up. And for me, that's what Pure Respite is all about. How do we use our voices, the power, the privilege that we hold to lift people up, to lift our communities up? And I am going to refer to Jim Gottstein's transformation triangle here as really good tool to keep your energy moving. I know Jim's in here somewhere. I saw your name, Jim, in there somewhere. So I use the transformation triangle often. And so the transformation triangle talks about, to make real systems change, you need to impact public attitudes, creating other choices, and strategic litigation, which, since I'm not a lawyer, I often also look at in some different ways than an attorney might. But you'll see on the left here, just have some examples of some of the Pure Respite, some of the images of Pure Respite houses. Afiya's up in the right-hand corner there, but you've also got one of the Wisconsin houses, one of the Georgia houses, one of the California houses, etc. And I want to say, though, Pure Respite doesn't have to be a house. If you are feeling limited in getting Pure Respite started in your area because you don't think you can get a whole house together, it doesn't need to be that. It can be an apartment, and it can even be a mobile, or it could be a hotel. One of the second Pure Respite to start in Massachusetts started in a hotel before they could get a house. So try not to think about these things in really rigid ways. Figure out what needs to be present in order to hold the integrity of what you're trying to accomplish, but be flexible with the other pieces to try and get things going and build momentum. Now, to continue on with that transformation triangle piece, I know there's a lot of words in your screen. I am going to give you the link to get this so you don't have to absorb all of this now, but I wanted to take that transformation triangle idea a little bit further and give you some sense of what that can look like in each area as you're trying to get a Pure Respite started or better supported in your area. So public attitudes. That can look like just sharing articles. I just gave one example of one of them that recently came out that really is in a more mainstream publication and lifts up the idea of the successes of Pure Respite. Having film screenings, trying to get them into your local public library or on even public access TV. I know not a ton of people believe that other people watch public access TV, but you'd be surprised how many people that you wouldn't otherwise reach will just be turning on, passing by, and notice things if you put it out there in some of these places. Explore change agent strategies. So I gave you a link in there to a worksheet that we use often that encourages you not to just try and go out there and scream about the change you want, but figure out what will appeal to the people who hold the power. What kinds of arguments should you be making? Really help walk you through thinking through some of those things. Writing letters to the editor, making your own media. I don't want to belabor this, and I know I'm only supposed to be taking 15 minutes. So as far as strategic litigation, I can't emphasize enough how useful it can be to get to know your legislators before you have something to argue for. Just having those relationships there so that when the opportunities show up to actually try and encourage them to sign off on something or help you promote something or create new legislation, the relationships are already there. It's also really hard in my area, and I think across this country and in other areas, to track when the legislative speaking opportunities will be. So coming up in your community with a way to track who's looking at the website, taking turns looking for the legislative hearings, and showing up to any legislative hearing that could create an opening to talk about Pure Respite or any of the other changes that you're trying to make is really, really key. So I'm just gonna, you can see what else is there for yourself. But under other choices, obviously this is the place where we're saying create the soteria, create the Pure Respite, create the anything, create the living room. But as a part of that process, you just want to make sure you are figuring out what are the pieces of each of those supports that make them what they are. So often we're hearing things get called a living room or called a Pure Respite, and they're doing things that are much more conventional within the system. So if you're going to invest the energy in creating these alternatives, invest the energy to make sure that they actually represent and don't add to the corruption or co-optation of these supports that are out there. It's so hard to reel things back. It is so important that as much as possible they get started on the right foot. So I hope that this chart just gives you a sense of, you know, what are some of the things you could be doing when you're thinking about how do you actually move something forward? How do you actually make the change? But I also just wanted to offer you a couple of minutes of other voices. So I'm just going to make sure my sound is shared here. And I'm going to play just a 2-minute clip of our Pure Respite video, which we always put out there. Anyone who ever wants to hold a film screening on Pure Respite to help create buy-in, we encourage you to use ours. But I specifically wanted to just have some of the people from that film talk to you today about why these changes are important. Hopefully, if you're not already excited, help get you excited. So I'm gonna please start that.
It's a really important part of the healing experience to become a part of a non-judgmental, fully accepting community.
The best way I've been able to recover, I guess, is people around me that just let me be who I am and kind of experience what I'm going through and are reflective in that process so I don't get trapped.
For me, the biggest thing is respect. I think that's key in a space like that, is to feel respected, is to be able to get respect, give respect. I think that that leads to be able to feel comfortable and really be able to relate with each other in a different kind of way, right? That we're all there for different reasons, or able to respect our differences and still come together and, you know, assist each other in healing. And that's what was great about Afiya specifically.
They knew I was facing forced commitment, and but somehow they weren't, you know, freaked out about that, and they didn't need to know, you know, every chart written on me and my, you know, 20-year history of in and out of things. And I really felt like it was someone relating to me as a fellow human being going through a hard time.
Hopefully that communicated a little bit of what I wanted to communicate to. You know, I'm assuming a lot of knowledge in this room at this point, both because I know there's people in here who've already been doing this work, and because I know a lot of you have been here across many presentations over these Sundays. In fact, some of you might have recognized Cindy at the end there, who I know spoke in at least one of these sessions with you. So I'm assuming a lot of knowledge that you're filling in the gaps here, but hopefully this is just a reminder of why we need these supports, how they impact people, and some of the ways that you can start moving. And I really do believe you can make this happen in your area. It's not always easy, and sometimes there's so much of a skew towards all the conventional clinical supports that already have all their roots, but people are looking for change right now. This pandemic has been so painful, so awful, but there's a lot of things happening at once, and a lot of demand for change is a part of it. And in fact, the pandemic has been a part of that in, you know, this kind of painful way, and sometimes a deeply painful way. But people have discovered through the pandemic that, for example, where they thought for people who are struggling with problems with substances, oh, you know, we could never pack someone's methadone doses for weeks at a time. Suddenly with the pandemic, well, we can't see you, so we're going to pack all your doses. And they're realizing that when they pack people's doses, not only could they survive that, but they could also get better jobs because they didn't have to have their entire life revolving every single day around needing to get their dose. That's just one example. So there's so much that's coming together right now that is making space and making people a little more receptive to this idea that change can happen.